every week you'll go through a new period. So we start off with the Greeks, and then we do the Romans, and then we go through medieval and the Renaissance and so on and so forth until you get to sort of the end of Lent term, where you've covered sort of a broad overview of everything. And then that's split into two sides. So you've got the meaning, which is looking at what people meant when they were painting these works or creating these objects, and the making, which is the technical aspect of what pigments you use, what techniques are employed.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We've got a new guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Eugénie, and I'm a third year art history student at Trinity Hall.
Nice. So today we're going to be talking about studying history of art at Cambridge. What's it like? So Eugénie, for anyone who doesn't know, because we have a lot of secondary school students watching the podcast, trying to work out what degrees they might want to study. Can you explain to us what history of art and the degree is?
So art history is basically looking at a bunch of stuff. It's not just paintings. You're also looking at sculpture, architecture, some textile art, even sometimes pottery. So you look at a bunch of stuff. There is a bit more of a focus on painting and architecture, but it's pretty open-ended. And the whole idea is basically to look at these objects and sort of understand what their purpose is and how they fit in the wider general cultural context of the time.
Nice. Okay, so the first question I have is, I think a lot of people, just to clarify that art history is a separate degree to history.
Yeah.
Yeah. And can you provide some info of why someone would be more tailored towards studying art history compared to a straight history course?
So I kind of considered history when I was sort of choosing my university degrees, but I think the main difference is that whereas history of art really places emphasis on the object and visual culture, history is much more sort of, well, it's less about sort of visual culture. So there is a clear distinction between the two subjects, but there is also overlap in the sense that inevitably, if you're studying an object from the 16th century, then it's important to know the context of what's happening at the period and who are the important figures politically and the wars that are happening, because all of these affect the art that's being produced.
Okay, interesting. So in art history, if you're looking at different objects or different pieces of art or architecture, is it necessarily the history that you're interested in, or could there be other things that you're interested, if you see what I'm saying?
Well, it kind of depends actually on what period the objects you're looking at are. So if you're looking at something that's older, it tends to be sort of a more historical focus, because we just don't have the same codes and sort of background as they did 500 years ago. So you spend a bit of time figuring out what people thought back then and then applying that to the object. But then you also can't forget that there are two other aspects. First of all, you have an artist who's involved, who's made it, and he's made it for someone. And how does that feed into the object and what it looks like and what its significance is. And then the other aspect is the technical aspect. And Cambridge has a really nice emphasis on that, which is looking at the actual materiality, because it's really easy when you look at these big famous works of art to forget that, at the end of the day, it's just a piece of wood that's been painted on with some oil paints. And being aware of that materiality and how it impacts the choices the artist makes for certain colors, or considering how colors might have aged badly, or perhaps, why choose bronze over marble because actually it was more prestigious at the time. So there's all these other considerations that come into account.
Nice. That's quite interesting. And I think, I don't want to speak for historians, but it seems like there's quite a heavy emphasis in how these objects are formed in art history, which might not have the same emphasis in history and looking at where the evidence comes from. I might be wrong in that. So could you shed some light in what the course structure is like for art history at Cambridge? What are there any set modules? Is there much freedom in the course, etc.?
So the great thing about Cambridge is you don't need to have studied the history of art at all before
Okay.
you arrive. And in fact, they've encouraged people, who haven't studied before, if it's something they care about and they love art, don't let it stop you to think, oh, I haven't done art history at A level, or
Mm.
I haven't really been around too much art. The whole point is that you get to Cambridge and they start you all afresh. So the first year, you have this big course that's sort of in two separate categories. But the general idea is every week you'll go through a new period. So we start off with the Greeks, and then we do the Romans, and then we go through medieval and the Renaissance and so on and so forth until you get to sort of the end of Lent term where you've covered sort of a broad overview of everything. And then that's split into two sides. So you've got the meaning, which is looking at what people meant when they were painting these works or creating these objects, and the making, which is the technical aspect of what pigments you use, what techniques are employed. So that's first year, and everyone does the same thing.
Okay. And before you go into second year, like, was there any particular parts, like any particular periods that you had a like favoritism towards?
Well, I actually kind of discovered the medieval because,
Okay.
yeah, it's sort of been a bit of a blur and never really considered it. Gothic architecture was really fun. I loved it. It was just, yeah, completely new, and really thinking about this idea of how people, it wasn't just about building things that were big, but there were really important theological implications behind the decisions that were being made for the architecture.
Mm.
And then there were also some really interesting contemporary stuff that I hadn't considered before. And learning about that and sort of various movements. I remember studying Yoko Ono and thinking that was really cool.
Nice. So religion must also does that have a substantial part in art history?
Well, to an extent, yes, because when you look at Western culture, especially sort of the older elements, it's really influenced by Christianity. And so it's useful, but by no means essential to have sort of a base knowledge of Christianity. One of my friends, actually, she had just come over from China and sort of had no basis in Christianity, and came up to me and was like, oh, how do I sort of learn this stuff? And genuinely the best advice I could give her was just pick up a children's Bible, because it'll give you all the basic information you need to know. But don't stress it out. They know you're all starting afresh. And the really nice thing is that the course is also really diverse. So you're not just looking at Western culture and Western art. There's a real idea of sort of diversifying it and looking at other themes. There's a course on Chinese pottery, for example, which you can do later on. So yeah, there is a real emphasis on the pluralism of cultures, which is really nice.
That's really cool. So after the first year, going through each period, and then the meaning and the making, what kind of modules can you do, like in second and third year?
So in second year, you start doing a bit more specific modules, but they aren't quite sort of very niche yet. So I know this year that you can get like a Renaissance one, for instance, and the whole idea is to kind of get you thinking about a particular period or a particular style in a bit more depth. And then, so you choose 2 courses to do, I believe. It's in the middle of a reform, so I'm not quite sure exactly where it stands at the moment. But so I think it's 2 courses over the course of the year that you do relatively in depth, and you get a piece of coursework at the end of each term that you hand in that sort of covers everything that you studied.
Nice. And is there dissertation as well in history of art?
Yeah, I'm working on my dissertation right now.
Nice.
And it's really, I mean, if you find a subject that you really care about, it can be so fun, because you're basically given free rein to write something that you really care about. And I'm working on this painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder called Mad Meg. And I was really lucky because I got to make a discovery on it. And so it gets to the point where, you feel like you're actively making a contribution to art history. And so everything you've done before sort of feeds into the process of, right, okay, I need to find documents and primary sources, and you're really well supported by the department. You get 2 specialist supervisions and 2 supervisions with your DOS, who really sort of help you through it and give you sort of any more information you might need or techniques and approaches on how to do it, because you're sort of left to it, but in a good way.
Nice. I mean, we can't see the painting, but could you explain to us like what the painting is of?
So it's a pretty whack painting.
Okay.
It's painted in 1563, and it's a Flemish folklore story. And the idea is that there's this mad woman called Margaret, and hence the name Mad Meg. And
Yeah.
she goes down to hell with an army of peasant women
Wow.
and just goes around to like steal everything.
In hell?
In hell.
Okay.
She goes all the way to hell and steals all the riches of the world and then goes back up to her little village in Flanders. And it's a completely insane story, and no one really knows why he painted it because it's so specific. There's only one other depiction that I know of that's been made of this subject. And yeah, there's this fun new detail which suggests some sort of new ideas on what it could mean that I'm working on. So no, it's all really exciting.
That is really exciting. So you were saying that there's a lot more choice in the second and third year of art history. I was just wondering what modules have you chosen to do for like the second half of your course?
So last year was a bit different the structure to what it will be for the incoming freshers. But I did a course called Jerusalem, and it was all about the Crusades and the art that was produced during the Crusades, which was really fun. And also something I wouldn't have considered, but I actually ended up really loving it, and I had an amazing professor. And then the other course I took last year was Rubens, Spirit and Ingenuity, which I also really enjoyed. And then this year I'm taking 2 courses again, but it'll be 4 courses for the freshers that are coming in. Yeah. And
the 4 short courses, right?
Yeah, so 4 short courses as opposed to 2 slightly longer ones, 2 per term. And so this year what I'm doing Russia, Imperial Painting and Patronage in Imperial Russia. And then the other one is Global Renaissance Sculpture, which is also really fun.
Damn, wow. Do you have a favourite amongst all of them?
I think it'd be hard to choose because I think the great thing is they all bring you very different things. So for me, the course on Jerusalem, because we know so little and there is so little evidence left, it really sort of introduced me to like a strict methodology and making sure that you can't just say it was made in, 1215 because we don't know that. So actually spend half your essay saying, well, we think it was made then and that. So all these bases is something you really cover with sort of, I found, the medieval stuff. The Rubens course taught me much more on the theoretical side, on sort of, how ideas influenced art in sort of the 17th century. And then Painting and Patronage in Imperial Russia has been really interesting in considering ideas such as, freedom actually is a big one because it's a state institution and there are serf artists who get involved, and it sort of makes you think, how does one consider what an artist is versus an artisan? And Global Renaissance Sculpture has just completely blown my mind because I hadn't really studied sculpture in that much detail before. So to focus solely on that as a medium has been really interesting.
Yeah, wow, nice. That sounds really cool. And because it sounds like there's like a lot of like cultural and historical knowledge that's like required to do those modules, but you're saying that a prospective student wouldn't need any of that knowledge, they would learn that during the course.
Yeah, so the nice thing is that first year is kind of like, because you get a bit of an overview of everything and you have a bunch of different professors who come in, you kind of get like a mini sense, like a mini lecture on what each of the courses will be like.
Okay.
So I had a course, for instance, in first year on like painting in Russia, which was really useful when I made my decisions because I could say, well, I really enjoyed that lecture, so this module would probably suit me. And then when it comes to the courses themselves, the great thing is we all arrive and we're all completely clueless. So the first week is just sort of laying down the basic facts, figuring out who was ruling when, what was happening at the time. So you're not expected to have any form of knowledge whatsoever. I mean, especially with Russia, where we all sort of went in almost blindfolded. And the first week was really just establishing the basic facts. So there is absolutely no pressure to know anything beforehand.
Yeah, because I think history of art, like, I think I can imagine prospective students feeling like they would need a lot of knowledge beforehand, but in terms of like their personal statement and in like, well, I guess in the interview, you're not going, and a student won't be assessed on how much knowledge they know during the interview, I imagine.
No, so the whole point is when they take your application, they'll first of all look if you've done history of art or not, because they'll tailor a bit the questions that they ask. But really what they're interested is much more in the way you think as opposed to how much you know.
Yeah.
Because they'll give you the sort of the actual side of learning all the facts and everything once you get to Cambridge. It's really more about understanding why you love visual culture, why is it important for you, why is art significant, And they take on so many people every year who haven't done art history before. So it's really something I wouldn't worry about. As long as you care about it and you're able to show that, there's no reason.
Nice, interesting. And correct me if I'm like completely off the ball here with this. I'm just thinking, is there some similarities between like history of art and English, but with history of art kind of looking at how I know, focusing on objects, whereas I guess English would be focusing on more like text and books. Is there a similarity between the two?
Yeah, I think so, because I did English at A-level, and so it's really interesting to sort of see the parallels.
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, when you're dealing with sort of older sources that have sort of more complex language, it's really useful to have done English, but again, by no means essential. And in terms of the techniques that you use with art history, you're sort of looking at a broader picture, and then you're going to zoom in and focus on one detail in the painting, like you would in English. You know, you read a whole book and you talk about the overall themes, and then you'll look at one quote and really sort of dissect that and look at it in detail. So it's exactly the same sort of idea and structure in how you sort of write your essays. Just it's about a painting as opposed to a poem or a novel.
Nice. So say like we had like a sixth form student trying to work out which degree they want to study, and they're torn between history of art and English. Like, what advice would you have for that student when deciding between the two?
I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. The main thing is that is the emphasis on visual culture and sort of looking at objects that you get in art history. And if that's something you find appealing, I think you'll really love the course, because there's a lot of hands-on approaches too, which is amazing, where you sort of get, in first year it was even weekly, we'd get one session where we'd go out to Cambridge and look at something. So the Fitzwilliam Museum, there's a study room where sort of professors can put in a request and say, I want my students to see these works, and so they'll pull them all out and you can go look at them in the study room, and you'll have your lecture in front of the actual paintings, which is incredible. Nice. Wow. And even get some handling sessions. So for instance, we did a lecture on Iranian pottery in our first year, and they brought out these really sort of old Iranian vases, and then they were just like, pick them up.
Can you expand a bit more about going to the Fitzwilliam Museum and the handling sessions? Because I think those two kind of things are specifically exclusive to history of art course. Like from what I know, you won't be doing that in any other course.
So it's kind of the aspect that I love the most, because you just get to go with the small group of students. Usually there's not more than 10 of us at any given time. And this one amazing professor who's really knowledgeable, and you go in and they'll give you some basic information. And most times it just ends up in being an informal chat about the piece and sort of what you think and what it might mean. And it's really about getting you to look at it and figure out why it's important and what it's trying to say. And the fact that you get to see the paintings in front of you makes such a difference in how you look at them, and gives you a lot of skills to sort of analyze the quality of a painting or style much more than if you're studying it from behind a screen. And that's one of sort of big things Cambridge. Otherwise, Cambridge also has an incredible collection of manuscripts, which I didn't really know before applying, but it's just one of the best in the country. So we're really lucky in that regard. So we also, for Jerusalem, for instance, we went to the Parker Library in Corpus College, and they had brought out these really cool medieval maps for us to have a look at. And you get to flip through these books that are just like filled with gold and wonderful illustrations. So it's, there's a range of stuff. In architecture, we had a lecturer where we just went to Senate House, which is like this 18th century building where everyone graduates when you finish your degree, about why it was built, who built it. So it's also a great way just to learn about Cambridge's architecture too.
Well, and just for anyone who doesn't know, like the Fitzwilliam Museum is a huge museum in Cambridge. So like these handling sessions, are they like a part of the lectures or the supervisions? And can you expand a bit more about how history of art students are taught in Cambridge?
So in first year, it's 1 a week. You have a handling session or a visit session. It kind of depends sort of what you're studying. Obviously, if you have architecture, you're not going to do a handling session. But so you have 1 a week in first year, and then you'll have 2 for every specialist module. That was my case. So it might be down to 1 because there's 4 courses now instead of 2. But you will get at least 1 handling session.
Are they they're separate to like the lectures or the supervisions?
So yeah, they're separate. They're their own thing.
They're their own thing. Okay, wow.
But usually they're put sort of like, instead of a lecture 1 week, you'll have a handling session.
Okay, yeah.
Except in first year where it's integrated sort of like on a weekly basis. So
yeah. And so you have your handling sessions, and I guess like lectures are probably like no different to like lectures in any other course.
Yeah, I mean, lectures are pretty standard.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's kind of funny about art history, especially for me, I've got slightly so small cohort, is that everyone sort of says you go to uni and there's like 200 people in a room.
Okay. Yeah.
Because we're a smaller course, it's usually like 20 to 30 of us.
Yeah.
And actually less for specialist modules. Numbers are capped around 10, I think.
Wow,
so
okay.
it's really specialized learning and you're getting so much content. But the great thing is it's a bit more informal and you can ask questions more easily.
Nice.
So that's one of the real highlights of the course too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a dream, because I mean, when in a lecture, if there's loads of people, it's you're going to struggle to get the lecturer's attention.
Yeah.
And there's only so many questions you could ask at the end of the lecture. At the end of the lecture. Yeah,
exactly.
So can you expand a bit more about what the supervisions are like and what supervisions are for anyone who doesn't know who's watching this?
So supervisions, they're often shortened to supos. And it's basically, you get 1 hour with a specialist in the field, and you hand in some work beforehand usually, and then they'll sort of mark your work, see what you're thinking, and you'll discuss a topic for an hour. So for me, a regular supervision, say for instance, I'm doing Russia, sort of the influence of Catherine the Great as a patron. So I'll do all my reading beforehand, write my essay, submit it. It'll be marked, and I'll show up to a supervision and we'll discuss what I wrote, but also what the general literature says on the subject. And it's also a great way to sort of challenge your ideas, because you don't feel like you're having to write it down. It's all really official. And so it's a lot easier to have very critical discussions on what's being written. And yeah, not just assume that because someone said it 50 years ago, it's the right thing to say. It's really about discussion and dialogue. It's not sort of you getting talked at by a professor for 1 hour. It's more informal. It's like a conversation. So sometimes I've had many supervisions where I've sort of been sat in an armchair, having my laptop on my laps and just sort of tapping away. And yeah, it's really casual, and it's a great way to sort of ask those questions, especially if you don't feel like asking them in the lecture. Supervisions is also a great time to ask those.
Yeah, I mean, and the ratios tend to be, I assume, are they like 1 to 1, 1 to 2?
Yeah, so it's like usually 1 to 2 or 1 to 3.
Okay, nice.
But no, it's really useful, because yeah, you get it's so critical. Like, my supervisor will tell me, but you say this, but why do you say this? Why is it important? Why do you think this? And it's all about pushing you to get the best out of your thoughts.
Nice. Yeah. I know one supervisor who would sometimes ask his students to read out their essay or parts of it, which I thought was quite. It's a good experience, because you're very self-conscious, and then you're having to be fast thinking, critical about what you're saying, but it's also a kind of thing that you're not going to experience if there's like 20 of you, because whereas I think if it's 2 students to 1 teacher, you have so much more attention to you, which I think is really valuable. And can you expand a bit more about how are students examined in art history?
So in first year, you get 4 papers total, 2 visual analysis and 2 essay based. And so they're all written, but the difference is in one set, the essay based ones, you'll get 3 questions, or a set of 8 questions from which you choose 3 on various topics, and you decide what to write. So for instance, what was the influence of theocracy of theology of light on Gothic architecture. And then you sort of write 3 paragraphs about that with an intro and a conclusion. And then the other one, which is very sort of unique to Cambridge, is the visual analysis, where you get given a pair or a trio of images that sometimes is drawn from the course and sometimes is just completely new and no one will have seen it before. And you have to write about it. You just get told, okay, why are these works put together? What do they mean? What in discussion, if you put this picture with this picture, how do they compare? What are their differences and similarities? So I've always really enjoyed that, because I think it's a really fun way to sort of get you to think alternatively about the painting and not just say the obvious, but actually look for more subtle connections between the works.
That is really interesting. I mean, that's really jogging memories for me about like unseen poems, but in English. But it's Yeah, but it's different in that it's a piece of art or a piece, like an object, and but the kind of how you're being assessed is quite very similar. So I think I guess what I'm trying to say is there'll be a lot of people who are watching this who really like, I don't know, either English or history, and will be thinking about choosing between one of those two to study at university, but not realizing that history of art is also an option.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. When you compare it to like an unseen poem, it's exactly the same sort of strategies that you're employing. And with history, I think you can almost consider it like when you look at a primary source, you know, you're looking at,
Yeah.
because there is a side of the theoretical side and like what it means, but there's also establishing the base facts of it was made in this place at this time. And that really links onto the history side of it.
Yeah, and I guess if you really to go from like comparing history and history of art, if you're really enjoying history, but you actually really enjoy specifically the sources and seeing how the sources are created and analyzing the sources, and everything else you didn't have as much interest in, then there's a chance that the history of art course might be really tailored towards you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's it is basically just primary sources 24/7. So
Yeah.
you love it. And you also get written sources that you have a look at sometimes, sort of as theoretical backing for like what people were saying at the time, what their ideas were. So it's more multidisciplinary than people think it might be.
Yeah, nice. And just to clarify, because you were saying for supervisions, you submit work beforehand. Is it normally essays that you submit?
So usually it's essays, but every once in a while we get asked to do a presentation, or I'm trying to think what else we might be asked to do. Or for instance, one time I was just asked to go to the Smithsonian Museum, choose an object, and then write, 1,000 words on it. So it can vary, it's flexible, but the general idea is, usually it's essays. But I would say like the essays aren't anything to stress about. It's really about you testing out your ideas and having fun with them. And not, there is no pressure. The supervisor will be really happy to read some new ideas that might be had on the works, as opposed to thinking, oh no, I have to be careful because someone's going to read this. Have fun with them. They're there for you to explore.
So is there a lot of room to like, I guess like make mistakes and have like your own, like try to work out your own interpretations in art history?
Absolutely. I mean, professors love it when you bring in like a fresh new idea and they say, oh, I've never thought about that before. And it's really validating when, you're talking to someone who's in the top of their field, has been doing this for 30 years and you get to say something new. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And I mean, more generally, if diversity of thought is really important. And because supervision essays aren't graded and, don't go further, it's a really good opportunity to sort of put that into practice and start thinking for later on when you're writing your dissertation, how you construct original thought that isn't just sort of a mind blur, but actually has structure and argument to it and backing your thinking.
Nice. Wow. So another question, just to like clarify this for anyone who's watching, who might have, it's quite a common question that we get for art history. Just to clarify this, you don't actually do any art though in the art history course?
No. So I myself, sure, I love doing a bit of art every now and then, but I am not good at all. So there is no actual practical side to it. That being said, I think if you did art at A-level, it's an invaluable experience because you do have this really great understanding of the materiality of objects and sort of the actual physical labor involved in them. So it's definitely an asset, but don't feel like you need to be an artist to apply.
I see, yeah. So it's not, so someone might find doing art that might help them with like with their approach to the course, but you're never going to be assessed on any artwork that you create.
No, never. And you learn techniques really well because it's really well taught. So
yeah,
it's nothing to stress about either. If you think, oh my God, I've never looked at art before, or like touched a paintbrush, you'll be fine.
And so in that sense, like say if you're looking at different paintings and you're learning about them, would you also learn about how like the artist created those paintings in terms of like the techniques and stuff?
Yeah. So one of the big things is it's actually really important when you're looking at a work of art to figure out how it was made. So for instance, for paintings, you've got two main distinctions. You've got oil painting and you've got egg tempera painting. So egg tempera you make with an egg base, and oil painting you make with an oil base. And they've got very different textures and feels to them and create very different impressions. So with egg painting, it's going to be like very, very solid colors. And then oil painting, it's really, really thin layers and just keep adding and adding layers and layers. And so you say you're building up color. So for instance, if you're going to try and build up sort of a flesh tone, then you'll start maybe, weirdly enough, with maybe a green base. And then you sort of layer on sort of some peach tones and then maybe a bit of red afterwards for the cheeks. And in the end, you end up probably with a really nice face. But it's also why actually in older paintings, sometimes they just look a bit green because the oil paint layers, they sort of thin out over time because, you know, they're 500 years old. They've seen a bit of time. And so that's why sometimes, you know, you look at really old paintings, you think, oh, it's just because actually the colors have sort of gone a bit under. And yeah.
Oh, wow. That is really, that's really interesting. It's really cool that you know that. I didn't realize you'd know like that amount of detail how the art is created. So it's not just about the history, but you do also learn about how it's formed.
Yeah, I mean, the people who do STEM are going to hate me for this, but I think there is almost a scientific aspect to it because you do have to know about sort of things like imaging techniques. So for me, for instance, my dissertation, I've become really interested in XRF, which is X-reflectography, which is a specific technique you use, which you scan it over the painting and it shows you all the elements that are in the painting. And sometimes it can show you sort of things, traces of certain, certain elements that are used to make pigments that you don't see in the final canvas, and can maybe show you things that have been done underneath and that the artist thought, well, actually, you know what, I don't like that, and just sort of paint it over. Or when I was doing Rubens last year, there was this really big painting called The Enthroned Madonna. And there's this woman who's wearing like a really drab grey dress, and you think, it's just not very nice, why would he bother? But actually, at the time, it's a colour called small blue, and it looks really great when you first do it, but it just ages really badly. And so all of these things have actually affected how we view paintings today, but we just don't realise it because we sort of when we look at a painting, we're seeing it at some sort of process in its deterioration, which is a strange thought, but it's actually also really important when you're considering colors and not an artist's choice.
Oh, wow, it's really interesting. I can see how like the science part can be relevant as well, given that I come from a chemistry background. So with art history, and when you're applying for art history, did you consider any other universities when you're applying?
Yeah, I mean, I considered a few because Cambridge was the dream, but I was also like, I'm never going to get in. And so I looked at St Andrews, which is also really, really good for art history. They've got a really nice course, but theirs is 4 years because it's Scottish. And then otherwise, I also looked at Courtauld, which is a really good art history sort of specialist institute. So it's based in London, and they also have their own gallery, which is incredible. It's open to the public, the Courtauld Gallery. I think people may have visited it before. Otherwise, I looked at Warwick, which had a really cool course too. Nice. You got to go away to Venice for a term, which I thought was really appealing.
Oh, a whole term?
For a whole term, you got to go to Venice during the Biennale and just sort of like potter around, look at the art, study there, which seemed really fun. So no, that was definitely up there on my list. And then otherwise, what else did I consider? UCL has a good course too. But yeah, I don't want to say anything, but I think Cambridge is the best personally.
Nice. That's very cool. And you're on your third year, right? The last year?
Yeah.
How are you finding it, and how has it been so far?
Third year is a bit of a step up from second year because in second year you just do the specialist modules and you write your coursework for those, and then it's kind of that's it. In third year you do the specialist modules, and on top you have the dissertation. So there is like a sense of progression and the work increasing. But that being said, like you've had time to prepare for it, and the dissertation really is a bit of fun because it's something that you really love. Nice. And then I mean, we'll see what happens after, but
do you have any plans for afterwards?
For afterwards, right now I'm applying to some masters,
Nice.
which is fun.
In art history?
In art history, because I mean, I think people often look at art history, my parents included, sort of looked at art history initially and sort of thought, well, I know you want to do it, but what's the point? What are you going to do after? And actually, there's a lot of options. I think for art history, doing a master's is really useful in helping you to specialize a bit more. So I'm looking at one of the Courtauld, for instance, that is looking just at sort of Flemish art in the medieval and early modern period, which is what my dissertation is on. So for me, that sort of fits the bill nicely. Big tick.
Yeah.
And yeah, so a bit of extra specialization is good, but otherwise there are actually a lot of avenues open to you once you study art history at uni. I mean, the classic ones that you can consider, for instance, is either sort of auction houses, which is all about, it's really fun. It's quite detective worky because you sort of get put in front of works. People bring you works and they say, oh, I've got this. I don't know how much it's worth and who it's by. Yeah. And you do this really fun process of trying to figure out who made it and getting all the proofs. And then you estimate the painting, obviously, and say, well, I think it'll sell for this much. Then you've got galleries, which is similar-ish, in the sense that, you know, you're also selling paintings and providing estimations, but instead of it all being in like one big evening sale where all the works are displayed and people sort of raise their hands and say, I will buy this for, you know, however many £1,000. You sort of, it's a bit more like a shop. You walk in, you say, I would like that painting, and you can buy it. And then there's also museums, which is really fun. So I actually interned in a museum over the summer, and I put together an exhibition for them, which was really, really cool.
Nice.
And that's a really nice way to be in touch with lots of great art. And also it's a really sort of rewarding subject because you're presenting it to the public and sort of saying, how do we make art history and art interesting and accessible to the general public? And then the fourth sort of career path I can think of that's directly related to art history is academia, which, you know, I think is also one that I'm almost feeling tempted by now that I've written, you know, I'm writing my dissertation. I just think it's actually really cool just to get to sit down and delve into something I really love.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, the job of an academic, it just like just being able to do your pastime as your job is a bit of a dream.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Eugene, for sharing with us about history of art. And I hope, I'm sure a lot of the viewers will find it really interesting. I really do believe that history of art seems to be one of those courses that people don't even realise that it's an undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
And they don't realise that they already have a lot of the skills needed to do the course. And so I think a lot of people will watch this podcast and then look into a bit more and see if they'd want to become art historians. Yeah,
well, all I can say is that, you know, I really love it, and I think it is a subject that is so underrated because people just don't know what it is. So give it a shot, figure out what it is, and then consider whether you like it or not.
Nice. Thanks to the viewers as well for watching, whether it's on YouTube or your podcasting platforms. And we'll see you guys next time. Nice.
Okay.
Cool. Oh, how did you find it?
Really fun. No, it was great to talk about it.
Nice.